The sterile scent of disinfectant hung heavy in the air, a stark contrast to the turmoil brewing within Gong Mingxian. He stared at the crisp white sheets draped over his legs, the starkness a cruel reminder of the 7 years stolen by darkness. 7 years he'd relied on touch and sound, 7 years he'd built a world inside his mind, a world now shattered by the intrusion of sight. The nurse's hesitant approach, the rustle of her starched uniform, grated on his nerves. "Mr. Liu still won't see anyone right now," he heard his mother's voice, laced with the familiar blend of concern and control that had always suffocated him. He didn't correct her use of his alias, Lu Qing. What did it matter anymore? "But sir, it's crucial for his recovery," the nurse's voice trailed off, swallowed by the heavy silence that followed. Mingxian clenched his jaw, the muscles in his face tightening. He could feel their pity, their awkward curiosity. He wanted none of it. "Get out," he muttered, the words rough around the edges, unfamiliar to his own ears. He hadn't spoken much these past few days, his voice a rusty instrument he was reluctant to play. His mother sighed, a theatrical performance he'd grown accustomed to over the years. "He's just overwhelmed, dear," he imagined her saying, her hand fluttering to her chest in that exaggerated display of frailty. He felt a surge of irritation, a bitter taste rising in his throat. He'd grown accustomed to the darkness, to the carefully constructed world he'd built around himself. Now, with the flood of visual information, he felt exposed, vulnerable. A small hand slipped into his, soft and warm. Wei Wei. His daughter. He could finally see her, her face a perfect blend of his and hers. Qingyu stood beside the bed, a silent shadow as always. Or so he had thought. These past 7 years, she had been a phantom, a whisper in the darkness, a comforting presence defined by touch and the gentle clinking of dishes in the kitchen. She was a puzzle he thought he'd solved, a woman defined by her silence, her devotion. He could now see the subtle curve of her lips, the delicate arch of her eyebrows, details he'd only imagined. He hadn't realized how much he'd missed seeing her. He'd almost forgotten what it felt like, this dull ache in his chest that whispered of longing. "Baba," Wei Wei's voice was a balm to his raw nerves. He squeezed her hand, trying to convey the emotion he couldn't articulate. "Mama says the doctor needs to check your eyes." He looked at Qingyu, her face etched with a strange mixture of anxiety and something else. Determination. Defiance. It was a look he'd never seen before, a look that didn't belong to the quiet, subservient woman he thought he knew. "You don't even cooperate with me in treatment," she spoke, her voice a low murmur, surprisingly melodic. It startled him, not just the sound of it, but the words themselves. He'd grown so accustomed to her silence, her communication limited to gestures and written notes. He'd built a narrative around her muteness, a story of sacrifice and devotion. Now, her voice, clear as a bell, shattered that narrative. It was the voice he'd heard countless times on the radio, a voice that had haunted his dreams, the voice of the masked song. Later, the gaudy lights of the KTV assaulted his newly recovered vision. He sat in the dimly lit corner booth, watching as his mother fussed over Shinjinyu, showering her with attention. The irony wasn't lost on him. Jinyu, the woman his mother had always preferred, the woman she'd tried to push him towards even after he'd married Qingyu. He watched Jinyu preen under his mother's gaze, a smug smile playing on her lips. He felt a flicker of disgust, a cold knot forming in his stomach. On the stage, Qingyu stood bathed in the spotlight. She held the microphone, her posture regal, her expression serene. "From today onwards," she began, her voice resonating through the room, capturing every whisper of attention, "Su Mengchen, formally farewell to the music scene." The silence that followed was thick with disbelief. Su Mengchen. The masked song queen. His wife. The woman who had lived in his house, cared for him, pretended to be mute for 7 years. It was all a lie. Or was it? What was the truth? He stared at her, his mind racing, trying to reconcile the quiet, subservient woman he thought he knew with the powerful, captivating figure on stage. He'd been blind, not just physically, but emotionally. He'd constructed a reality around himself, a reality that was now crumbling around him. He remembered all those nights he'd spent listening to the masked song, finding solace in her voice, unaware that the woman he sought was right beside him. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow, leaving him breathless. Qingyu, or rather, Su Mingchen, continued, her voice laced with a hint of sadness. My voice, it belongs to someone else now. It belongs to the memories of a past I can no longer return to. Her gaze swept across the room, lingering for a moment on him before moving on. He felt a pang of something he couldn't quite name. Regret? Longing? He wanted to reach out to her, to understand, to bridge the chasm that had opened between them. But he was frozen, trapped in the wreckage of his own assumptions. Wei Wei, sitting beside him, looked up at him with wide, innocent eyes. Baba, she whispered, Mama is really the masked song. He nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. He looked at Qingyu on stage, her image shimmering in the artificial light, a mirage in the desert of his newfound vision. He had his sight back, yet he felt more lost than ever. The world he thought he knew had been a carefully constructed illusion, and now, with the truth exposed, he was left to navigate the unfamiliar landscape of reality. He had so many questions, so much he needed to understand. But for now, all he could do was watch, as the woman he thought he knew transformed into a stranger before his eyes. The antiseptic smell of the hospital corridor, a scent Qingyu had grown accustomed to over the past 7 years, now carried a strange undercurrent of unreality. The sterile white walls seemed to blur slightly as she focused on the faces before her, faces etched with a mixture of disbelief and overwhelming joy. Her brother, Shenharan, his eyes reddened, clutched her hand with a fierceness that spoke volumes. 7 years, sister, he choked out, his voice thick with emotion. Our support club, they never stopped looking for you. Qingyu's heart clenched. 7 years. 7 years of silence, of pretending, of living a half-life. She had buried the vibrant, passionate singer deep within, locking her away to protect the fragile peace she'd painstakingly built with Mingxian. Now, that carefully constructed facade was crumbling, revealing the woman she truly was. The masked song. A shiver ran down her spine. It was a name that echoed with both triumph and fear. Triumph for the recognition, the adoration, the freedom of expression she found on stage. Fear for the consequences, the upheaval it would inevitably bring to her precarious existence. Her sister-in-law, Mei Lin, dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, her smile trembling. We couldn't believe it when we saw the news, she whispered, her gaze shifting towards the closed door of Mingxuan's room. To think you were here, all this time. Qingyu's gaze followed hers, a knot tightening in her stomach. What would he think? What would he say? The memory of his stunned silence, the flicker of something unreadable in his newly sighted eyes, haunted her. Had she made a mistake? Had she shattered the fragile bond they had forged in the darkness? She squeezed Haran's hand, seeking a grounding anchor in the swirling chaos of her emotions. He understood. He always had. Haran, sensing her unease, gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. Be sure to hold, let my sister see our love for her, he directed his words to Mei Lin, but his eyes held Qingyu's. Mei Lin nodded, understanding dawning in her eyes. She reached into a large bag she carried and pulled out a stack of meticulously preserved fan mail, tied neatly with ribbons. These are just a few, she said, her voice regaining some of its usual cheerfulness. We kept everything. Every letter, every drawing, every message of support. The fans, they never gave up hope. Qingyu stared at the stack of letters, a wave of emotion washing over her. For 7 years, she had existed in a bubble of silence, believing her voice, her identity, had been swallowed by the shadows. Yet, here was tangible proof that she was remembered, cherished, even. A bittersweet ache bloomed in her chest. The masked song lived on, even as Qingyu, the mute wife, faded into the background. The weight of those letters felt heavier than any physical burden she'd ever carried. Each one represented a connection, a shared emotion, a moment of pure artistic expression that transcended the confines of her silent world. It was a reminder of who she was, who she could be, if only she dared to break free. But could she? Could she truly reconcile the two halves of her life, the celebrated singer and the devoted wife? The question hung in the air, heavy and unanswered. Qingyu, Haran said softly, interrupting her thoughts. The fans, they're planning a welcome back concert. A huge one. They want their queen back. He paused, watching her carefully. They want you back. The word struck a chord deep within her. A longing, a yearning she thought she'd buried resurfaced with a vengeance. The stage, the lights, the microphone, the feeling of power, of connection, of pure, unadulterated joy. She closed her eyes, briefly allowing herself to bask in the memory. The roar of the crowd, the adrenaline coursing through her veins, the music flowing from her lips like a living entity. It was a part of her she couldn't deny, a part of her that had been dormant for too long. But then, the image of Mingxuan's face flashed before her eyes, his expression inscrutable, his silence deafening. The joy dimmed, replaced by a gnawing uncertainty. Could she have both? Could she be the masked song and Qingyu, the wife? Or would she have to choose, sacrificing one part of herself to preserve the other? The arrival of Su Mengchen, his face etched with concern, further complicated the already tangled web of her emotions. He approached her with a hesitant step, his gaze searching hers. Qingyu, he began, his voice low and urgent. I need to speak with you. Alone. His words hung in the air, charged with an unspoken significance that sent a chill down her spine. What could he possibly want to tell her? What secrets did he hold? She glanced at her brother and sister-in-law, their faces mirroring her own confusion. It's all right, she reassured them, her voice barely a whisper. I'll be back soon. As she followed Mingchen down the sterile corridor, the weight of the past 7 years pressed down on her, heavier than ever before. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to stretch and writhe like the secrets that lay hidden beneath the surface of their carefully constructed lives. The antiseptic smell of the hospital, once a comfort, now felt suffocating. She knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that nothing would ever be the same again. The unveiling of the masked song was just the beginning. The real drama, the true unraveling, was yet to come. She braced herself, steeling her resolve for the revelations that awaited her, for the choices she would inevitably have to make. The path ahead was shrouded in uncertainty, but one thing was clear, her life, her identity, everything she thought she knew, was about to change forever. The afternoon sun, a pale, watery yellow, slanted through the hospital window, casting long, distorted shadows across the sterile white room. Mingxian watched the dust motes dance in the light beams, a newfound fascination with the mundane now that the world was no longer veiled in darkness. His father had visited earlier, his voice a low rumble of concern and cautious optimism. The old man hadn't stayed long, perhaps sensing the tension that crackled in the air between Mingxian and Qingyu. Now, only the quiet hum of the hospital equipment and Qingyu's soft breathing filled the room. She sat by the window, her profile etched against the fading light, a fragile silhouette against the stark white curtains. He found himself observing her with a new, unsettling intensity, trying to reconcile the woman he'd known for 7 years with the phantom image of the masked song singer he'd only glimpsed on stage. 7 years of silence. 7 years of a life he thought he understood, a life that now felt like a carefully constructed illusion. Dad will see us tomorrow. Qingyu's voice, once a whisper, now held a surprising strength, a resonance that echoed in the small room. The words themselves were simple, but Mingxian felt a tremor of unease. He hadn't yet processed the implications of her recovered voice, of her true identity. Each word she spoke was like a pebble tossed into the still waters of his carefully ordered world, creating ripples of uncertainty. He nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the intricate patterns of the bedsheet. He wants to see us. The word, us, felt strange, foreign on his tongue. For so long, us had been him and his silent, supportive wife, a dyad built on dependence and shared darkness. Now, this us included a third entity, a vibrant, powerful woman who commanded stages and captivated audiences. Qingyu turned towards him, her face partially obscured by the shadows. He could just make out the curve of her lips, a hint of a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. After the performance tomorrow I plan to announce everything. A chill ran down Mingxuan's spine. Everything. What did everything encompass? Her voice. Her career. Their marriage. His mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of their fractured reality. The 7 years of their marriage played out in his memory like a silent film, now suddenly overlaid with a jarring, unfamiliar soundtrack. He swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. Everything. Qingyu's gaze held his, steady and unwavering. Farewell to the music scene. In the past few years I married Lin Xian. The name, his name, sounded strange coming from her lips, laced with a formality that hadn't been there before. She paused, her fingers tracing the outline of a small, faded scar on her wrist, a scar he'd never noticed before. And, her voice dropped to a near whisper, slightly alive. Wait for the moment Lin Xian removes the gauze. The air in the room thickened, heavy with unspoken words and buried emotions. Slightly alive, the phrase hung in the air like a fragile butterfly, its wings barely beating. He remembered the doctor's cautious optimism, the slow, agonizing return of his sight, the world unfolding before him in blurry, fragmented images. Had she truly been living only for that moment? For the moment he could see her again? The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. It implied a depth of devotion he hadn't realized existed, a love that had endured 7 years of silence and subterfuge. But it also implied a level of deception he wasn't sure he could comprehend. He closed his eyes, trying to shut out the swirling chaos in his mind. He had built his world around Qingyu's silence, her gentle touch, her unwavering support. He had seen her, or rather, not seen her, as a constant, a fixed point in his universe of darkness. Now, with his sight restored, everything was shifting, blurring, morphing into something unfamiliar and unsettling. He felt a strange sense of loss, a grief for the world he'd known, the world he'd constructed in the absence of light. Wei Wei, he began, his voice rough, does she know? Qingyu's expression softened, a flicker of warmth in her eyes. She knows. She's been my confidant, my little helper, all these years. A faint smile touched her lips, a genuine smile this time, one that reached her eyes and illuminated her face. He realized with a jolt that he'd rarely seen her smile, truly smile, in the 7 years of their marriage. The thought of Wei Wei, his daughter, caught in the crossfire of their complicated relationship, tightened his chest. He had always believed he was protecting her, shielding her from the harsh realities of his blindness. But what had he actually shielded her from? The truth? Her mother's vibrant, passionate self. He felt a pang of guilt, a sharp, stinging realization that he might have inadvertently imprisoned them both in his world of darkness. He opened his eyes and looked at Qingyu, really looked at her, for perhaps the first time. He saw the fine lines around her eyes, the subtle strength in her jaw, the way her fingers nervously twisted a loose strand of hair. He saw not just the woman who had cared for him, but the woman who had lived a secret life, a life of music and passion, a life he had been completely oblivious to. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken words and unresolved emotions. The setting sun cast long, dramatic shadows across the room, turning the sterile white walls into a canvas of shifting light and shade. He felt a sudden urge to reach out, to touch her, to bridge the chasm that had opened between them. But he hesitated, his hand hovering in midair. He wasn't sure what he would find if he touched her, if he crossed that invisible line. Would he find the woman he thought he knew? Or would he find a stranger, a phantom, a figment of a life he had never truly understood? The antiseptic scent of the hospital room, sharp and sterile, did little to cut through the thick tension that hung in the air. Mingxian sat rigid, his hands clenched in his lap, the ghost of bandages still pressing against his eyes. His father, his hand surprisingly steady despite his age, peeled back the final layer of gauze. A blinding white light assaulted Mingxian, a stark contrast to the comforting darkness he had grown accustomed to. He blinked rapidly, his pupils contracting, the world slowly resolving itself from a hazy blur into distinct shapes, colors, faces. This is it, he thought, his heart pounding against his ribs like a trapped bird. This is what I've waited for, feared for, all these years. A small face swam into focus, framed by two dark braids. Large, curious eyes stared back at him, filled with a mixture of awe and apprehension. "It's Dad," a small voice whispered, laced with wonder. "Dad, the gauze is removed. Daddy can see us now." Wei Wei. His daughter. The tiny life he had only known through touch and sound, now a tangible being before him. Her words echoed in his ears, not just as sounds, but as tangible proof of a reality he was only now beginning to grasp. A wave of something akin to guilt washed over him. He hadn't seen her grow, hadn't witnessed her first steps, her first words. He had been absent, lost in his own darkness, while her world bloomed with vibrant colors he couldn't perceive. His gaze shifted, landing on the woman standing slightly behind Wei Wei. Qingyu. His wife. 7 years of silence, 7 years of her gentle hands guiding him through the darkness, now stood before him in the flesh. Her face, etched with a quiet strength he had only felt, not seen, was more beautiful than he could have ever imagined. Yet, a flicker of uncertainty danced in her eyes, a vulnerability that made his chest ache with a mixture of longing and regret. He had taken her silence for granted, for weakness, perhaps. Now, knowing the truth, he saw a resilience he hadn't understood before. She's different, he thought, his mind struggling to reconcile the image before him with the phantom he had constructed in his mind. Stronger. More vibrant. Beside Qingyu stood another woman, her smile strained, her eyes holding a glint of something cold and sharp. Shen Jinyu. Her presence grated on him, an unwelcome intrusion into this fragile moment of revelation. He could sense the tension radiating from her, a palpable animosity directed towards Qingyu. He knew, instinctively, that the dynamics within this room were far more complex than what met the eye. The doctor, oblivious to the emotional undercurrents swirling around him, smiled brightly. "Mr. Gong, congratulations. Your vision is fully restored." His words felt hollow, meaningless in the face of the silent storm brewing within the room. Later that night, the opulent, dimly lit confines of a KTV box offered little solace. The gaudy decor and pulsating music felt jarring, a stark contrast to the sterile quiet of the hospital room. Mingxian sat nursing a glass of whiskey, the amber liquid swirling in the glass, mirroring the turbulent emotions within him. He watched Wei Wei, her earlier shyness replaced by a childish glee as she belted out a popular tune, her voice surprisingly strong and clear. Qingyu sat beside him, her gaze fixed on their daughter. The silence between them was heavy, laden with unspoken words and unresolved feelings. Mingxian felt a desperate need to bridge the chasm that had opened between them, but the words seemed to catch in his throat. You can sing," he finally managed, his voice raspy. It was a statement, not a question. He had heard her voice, clear and resonant, echoing through the hospital room earlier. The same voice that had captivated millions as the masked song queen. Qingyu turned to him, a faint smile playing on her lips. "I used to," she replied, her voice soft, melodic, like a forgotten melody. "Before," she trailed off, her gaze drifting towards Weiwei. "Before me," Mingxian finished the sentence in his mind. "Before the darkness stole my sight," and she stole her voice. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. He had been so consumed by his own loss that he hadn't seen hers, hadn't understood the sacrifice she had made. He had trapped her in a prison of silence, while she had built a world of music in the shadows. He wanted to ask her why she had pretended to be mute for so long, why she had hidden her talent, her identity. But the questions remained unspoken, caught in the tangled web of their shared past. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that her silence, like his blindness, had been a mask, a shield against a world that had wounded them both. Shen Jinyu's shrill laughter cut through the tense silence, shattering the fragile peace. "Qingyu, you haven't lost your touch," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Still hiding your light under a bushel, I see." Her words were laced with a subtle venom that made Mingxuan's jaw clench. Qingyu's smile vanished, replaced by an expression of weariness. "Some lights are meant to be hidden," she replied, her voice low, almost a whisper. Her gaze met Mingxuan's, and in that fleeting moment, he saw a glimpse of the pain she had carried for so long, a pain he was only beginning to understand. The secrets they held, the lies they had told, the sacrifices they had made, all of it hung in the air between them, a silent testament to the complex tapestry of their lives. The truth, he knew, was far more intricate, far more painful, than he could have ever imagined. And he was finally ready to see it. The sterile scent of antiseptic hung heavy in the air, a stark contrast to the turmoil brewing within Gong Mingxian. He stared at the woman before him, her voice, once a phantom whisper, now clear and resonant, echoing the melodies he'd only ever heard from a masked figure on a distant stage. It was her. The masked song. The realization hit him like a physical blow, disorienting and strangely exhilarating. He'd searched for her, obsessed over her voice, never imagining she was so close, hidden in plain sight. 7 years. 7 years of silence, of a gentle, almost ethereal presence by his side. He had built an image of her in his blindness, a fragile, delicate creature needing his protection. Now, with his sight restored, the image shattered, replaced by a woman of strength, of hidden depths he was only beginning to glimpse. His hand, resting on the crisp white hospital sheet, clenched involuntarily. He felt foolish. Duped. But also intrigued. Shen Qingyu met his gaze, her own eyes shimmering with a complex mix of emotions he couldn't decipher. Relief? Triumph? Perhaps a flicker of the affection he remembered from a lifetime ago, before the accident, before the silence. He swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. The silence that had defined their years together now felt like a gaping chasm between them. You can speak, he finally managed, the words sounding alien even to his own ears. A faint smile played on her lips. "I can," she confirmed, her voice soft yet firm. Her gaze drifted towards Weiwei, her daughter, clinging to her hand as if afraid to let go. He doesn't know. He doesn't know any of it. The thought echoed in Qingyu's mind, a bitter taste on her tongue. She had lived a lie for so long, a carefully constructed facade to protect him, to protect their family. Now, the truth was a weapon, sharp and double-edged. She had to choose her words carefully, each syllable a potential landmine in the fragile landscape of their relationship. Mama's voice is so pretty, Wei Wei chirped, oblivious to the undercurrents swirling around her. She looked at Ming Xian, her eyes wide and innocent. Papa, did you know Mama sings? Ming Xuan's gaze shifted between his daughter and his wife, his mind reeling. He remembered the countless nights listening to the masked song, the haunting melodies weaving their way into his dreams, filling the void of his sightless world. He had confided in Shinjinyu, his supposed confidant, sharing his fascination, his yearning for the voice that seemed to understand the depths of his loneliness. She never said, she never told me. A cold knot tightened in his stomach. Later, the sterile white of the hospital room gave way to the flashing neon lights of a KTV, a stark, almost surreal backdrop for the unfolding drama. The plush, velvet booths seemed to absorb the tension, the air thick with unspoken words and half-truths. Shen Jinyu sat across from Ming Xian, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against the glass tabletop, a nervous tick he'd never noticed before. He saw her now with new eyes, the carefully crafted mask of concern slipping, revealing a flicker of something darker beneath. Why didn't she tell me? Was she jealous? The thought struck him, unwelcome and unsettling. Back then, Shen Jinyu began, her voice laced with a forced casualness that grated on Mingxuan's nerves. Gong Mingxian mistakenly thought I was the masked song queen. She let out a small, brittle laugh. It was quite amusing, actually. He would go on and on about her voice, how it touched his soul. Little did he know, she trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air. Mingxuan's jaw tightened. The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture he didn't want to see. He had poured his heart out to her, confided in her, believing she understood his deepest longings. And all the while, she had been what? Amused? Envious? He felt a surge of anger, hot and sharp. You knew? He asked, his voice dangerously low. Shen Jinyu shrugged, a delicate movement of her shoulders. You can't blame me, can you? It was a harmless misunderstanding. Besides, she added, her voice hardening, you were blind. It didn't matter who you thought she was. The cruelty in her words struck him like a physical blow. He had been vulnerable, trusting, and she had taken advantage of his blindness, feeding his fantasies for her own amusement. He looked at her, truly saw her for the first time, and felt a wave of disgust wash over him. He stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor, the sound echoing in the suddenly silent room. Across the room, Qingyu watched the exchange, her heart clenching with a mixture of pain and anger. He still doesn't understand. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for the inevitable confrontation. She approached them, Wei Wei's small hand still clasped tightly in hers. This is my son, Ming Wei. Her voice was clear and steady, cutting through the tense atmosphere. I have divorced his father. Each word was a deliberate strike, shattering the illusion of normalcy, forcing the truth into the open. Ming Xian turned to face her, his eyes wide with disbelief. Divorced? But he looked at Wei Wei, at the striking resemblance between them, the same dark eyes, the same delicate features. My son. The realization hit him like a thunderbolt. He had a son. And he had been blind to it, blind to the truth that was right in front of him. He looked at Qingyu, his mind racing, trying to reconcile the woman he thought he knew with the woman standing before him, the masked song, the mother of his son, the wife he had unknowingly pushed away. The silence returned, heavier now, laden with the weight of unspoken words, of years lost, of truths yet to be revealed. The neon lights of the KTV pulsed around them, casting long, distorted shadows, a visual echo of the fractured reality they were now forced to confront. The stale air of the KTV room, thick with the scent of cheap alcohol and lingering cigarette smoke, pressed down on Qingyu. The flashing neon lights painted the faces around her in an unsettling, flickering glow. Each flash seemed to illuminate another layer of deception, another hidden truth in the eyes that watched her. Her hands, clasped tightly in her lap, felt cold and clammy. 7 years. 7 years of silence, of living a lie, of watching the man she loved drift further and further away. Tonight, the dam of her silence would break. Gong Mingxian sat across from her, his newly sighted eyes fixed on her face. He was a stranger in a familiar body. The gentle curve of his lips that she remembered so well was now a thin, almost cruel line. The warmth in his eyes, once a beacon in her darkest days, had been replaced by a chilling scrutiny. Had he always been this cold, or had blindness softened him, only for his restored sight to reveal the man he truly was? She swallowed, the lump in her throat heavy with unspoken words, with years of swallowed cries. Wei Wei, her daughter, sat beside her, small and fragile, clutching a plush toy. The child's usual bright eyes were dull, her cheeks flushed with an unnatural heat. Qingyu's heart clenched. Wei Wei's sudden illness weighed heavily on her, a knot of worry tightening in her stomach. Had she been careless? Had someone deliberately harmed her child? The thought sent a shiver of fear down her spine. The air crackled with unspoken tension. Shen Jinyu, perched on the edge of the sofa next to Mingxian, shot venomous glances at Qingyu. Her painted smile didn't quite reach her eyes, a mask barely concealing the simmering resentment beneath. Jinyu's presence here, in this room, was a constant, throbbing reminder of the wedge driven between her and Mingxian. A wedge Jinyu herself had carefully hammered in, day after day, year after year. Qinyu's fingers tightened around the fabric of her dress. She wouldn't let Jinyu win. Not tonight. Not ever. Su Mengchen, sitting silently in the corner, observed the scene with an unreadable expression. His presence was a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit, a ghost from their past that threatened to unravel the carefully constructed facade of their present. Qinyu's heart pounded against her ribs. He knew. He knew the truth about her, about the masked song. The weight of his knowledge pressed down on her, suffocating her. Do you dislike me for not being able to speak? The words, raspy from disuse, tumbled out of Qinyu's mouth before she could stop them. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to her. The question hung in the air, a fragile butterfly pinned under the weight of their gazes. Mingxuan's eyes narrowed, a flicker of something unidentifiable crossing his face. Was it surprise? Regret? Or simply annoyance at her broken silence? Qingyu felt a strange sense of liberation. The words, once locked away, now flowed freely. She's the masked song, isn't she? Su Mengchen's voice, low and smooth, cut through the silence. His words landed like a bomb, shattering the fragile truce. Mingxuan's gaze snapped to Su Mengchen, then back to Qingyu. His eyes, now wide with disbelief, searched her face as if seeing her for the first time. The air crackled with unspoken accusations, with the ghosts of their shared past. Qinyu's voice faltered. She looked at Wei Wei, her daughter's pale face a stark reminder of her priorities. Wei Wei isn't feeling well, she said, her voice laced with worry. I think someone drugged her. The accusation hung in the air, thick and heavy. Shen Jinyu's carefully constructed composure cracked. A flicker of panic crossed her face, quickly masked by a forced smile. What are you talking about, Qingyu? Why would anyone do that? Qingyu met Jinyu's gaze, her own eyes burning with a newfound fire. Shen Jinyu, she said, her voice now clear and strong, each word a hammer blow against the wall of Jinyu's deceit. Did you drug Wei Wei? Jinyu's face paled. She opened her mouth to protest, but no words came out. The silence screamed her guilt. Mingxuan's gaze shifted from Jinyu to Qingyu, his expression a mixture of confusion and dawning realization. Qingyu stood up, her legs trembling slightly. She walked to the karaoke machine, ignoring the stunned silence of the room. She selected a song that had become her anthem, a song that spoke of hidden strength and resilience. The music began, filling the room with a haunting melody. Qingyu closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and began to sing. Her voice, rich and powerful, soared through the room, washing over them like a tidal wave. It was the voice of the masked song, the voice that had captivated millions, the voice that had been silenced for 7 years. As she sang, the layers of pretense fell away. The mute wife, the docile caregiver, disappeared. In her place stood Qingyu, the woman she truly was, strong, defiant, and unafraid. The song ended. The silence that followed was deafening. Mingxian stared at her, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and something akin to fear. Jinyu's face was ashen, her carefully crafted mask shattered beyond repair. "I didn't plan to hide," Qingyu said, her voice ringing with emotion. "But you hurt me, Mingxian. You both hurt me. And I won't let you go. Not this time." Her gaze locked with Mingxuan's, a silent challenge passing between them. The air crackled with unspoken words, with the promise of a storm yet to come. The game had changed. The masks had fallen. And Qingyu was finally ready to play. The sterile scent of antiseptic hung heavy in the air, a stark contrast to the lingering perfume of fear that clung to Qingyu. Weiwei, her small face pale against the crisp white sheets, slept soundly, her breathing shallow but even. The doctor's words echoed in Qingyu's mind, the juice she drank contained a large amount of anti-itching medication. Fortunately, we caught it in time. Relief washed over her, a fragile wave against the jagged rocks of fear that had threatened to pull her under. She glanced at Mingxian, his face etched with a grimness that mirrored her own earlier terror. He stood by the window, his back rigid, his gaze fixed on the cityscape twinkling in the distance. He hadn't spoken a word since they arrived at the hospital. Qinyu's heart ached with a familiar, dull throb. The silence between them stretched, taut with unspoken accusations and a history too complicated to unravel in the sterile confines of a hospital room. "He suspects me," she thought, the words a bitter taste on her tongue. "He thinks I did this." The idea was preposterous, ludicrous even, yet the suspicion in his eyes had cut her deeper than any blade. 7 years. 7 years she had played the mute, the devoted wife, sacrificing her own voice, her own identity, for him. And yet, one incident, one moment of crisis, and all that carefully constructed trust crumbled. Mingxuan's fists clenched at his sides. The city lights blurred through the windowpane, a kaleidoscope of colors that mocked the darkness within him. Weiwei's near brush with danger had unearthed a raw, primal fear he hadn't known he possessed. He couldn't shake the image of her struggling to breathe, her small body convulsing. His gaze shifted to Qingyu, her face etched with worry, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. He wanted to believe her innocence, to trust the woman who had cared for him through the darkness, yet a nagging doubt persisted. The sudden reappearance of her voice, the revelation of her secret identity, the timing of it all, it felt like a carefully orchestrated play, a deception unveiled. He had been blind, not just physically, but emotionally as well. He had allowed himself to be lulled into a false sense of security, blind to the currents swirling beneath the surface of their seemingly tranquil life. A sharp intake of breath broke the silence. Jinyu stood at the doorway, her face a mask of contrived concern. "Oh, Weiwei. Poor child. Is she all right?" Her voice, laced with faux sympathy, grated on Qinyu's nerves. "She's enjoying this," Qinyu thought, her gaze hardening. "She's reveling in my pain." "The doctor said she'll be fine," Mingxian replied curtly, his voice devoid of warmth. Jinyu stepped closer, her eyes flitting between Mingxian and Qinyu. "It's such a relief. It could have been so much worse. It makes you wonder how could something like this happen." Her words hung in the air, heavy with insinuation. Jinyu met her gaze, her own eyes blazing. It makes you wonder indeed. What do you mean by that? Jinyu asked, feigning innocence. The juice she drank contained a large amount of anti-itching medication, Mingxian stated, his gaze fixed on Jinyu. Jinyu gasped, placing a hand over her heart. It's you, how can you slander me? Her voice trembled with feigned outrage. A wave of nausea washed over Jinyu. This charade was sickening. You were the one who bought the juice, Jinyu. You were the only one with her before she fell ill. It wasn't me. I swear. Jinyu's eyes widened, brimming with crocodile tears. I would never hurt Wei Wei. You know how much I care for her. Then who was it? Mingxuan's voice was dangerously low, his patience wearing thin. A flicker of panic crossed Jinyu's face before she quickly composed herself. It wasn't me who drugged you that day. It's Erfan. The name hung in the air, a sudden shift in the narrative, a desperate attempt to deflect blame. Mingxuan's eyes narrowed. Erfan. The name resonated with a faint, unsettling familiarity. A piece of the puzzle he hadn't known was missing suddenly clicked into place. He recalled the whispers, the rumors about Su Mengchen's close associate, the man who had vanished without a trace shortly after the incident that had robbed him of his sight. He looked at Jinyu, her expression unreadable. He saw a flicker of something in her eyes, a flash of recognition, perhaps even fear. The room felt suffocating, the air thick with unspoken truths and half-buried secrets. He needed air, space to think. He needed to unravel the tangled threads of deceit that had bound him for so long. He turned and walked out, leaving behind the sterile confines of the hospital room and the suffocating web of lies that threatened to consume them all. The flashing neon lights of the KTV assaulted Mingxuan's senses, a jarring contrast to the sterile silence of the hospital. He found a secluded booth, the pulsating music a dull throb against the whirlwind of thoughts in his head. He ordered a drink, the amber liquid swirling in the glass, a reflection of the turmoil within him. Erfan. The name echoed in his mind, a ghost from the past. He remembered now, the hushed conversations, the veiled threats. Erfan had been obsessed with the masked song singer, a dangerous obsession that had spiraled out of control. He had wanted her, possessed her, and when he couldn't have her, he had sought revenge. But why drug him? What did he have to do with any of this? The pieces of the puzzle refused to fit, the edges jagged and misaligned. A figure materialized in the booth, her silhouette familiar against the flashing lights. Su Mengchen. Her expression was grave, her eyes filled with a sadness he hadn't seen before. You needed to know the truth, Mingxian, she said, her voice low. He looked at her, his gaze questioning. What truth? Erfan was jealous of you, she revealed, her words carefully chosen. He believed you were the reason the masked song singer disappeared. A cold dread washed over him. He looked at her, his heart pounding in his chest. But the masked song singer, it was Jinyu. Su Mengchen's gaze held his. Yes, she said softly. It was Jinyu. And Erfan blamed you for her silence. She paused, her eyes filled with a deep, unspoken pain. He drugged you that night, hoping to silence you too. To make you understand her pain, her loss. The truth hit him with the force of a physical blow. He had been blind, deaf, and dumb, caught in a web of lies spun by a man consumed by obsession. He had blamed Jinyu, doubted her, when all along, she had been the victim. He had been so focused on his own pain, his own loss, that he had failed to see hers. He closed his eyes, the weight of his guilt crushing him. He had to find her, tell her, beg for her forgiveness. He had to reclaim the love he had so carelessly thrown away. The sterile white walls of the Civil Affairs Bureau seemed to mock the vibrant chaos of their lives. Qingyu stood ramrod straight, the red stamp on the divorce certificate a burning brand against the stark paper. She felt a tremor run through her, not of sadness, but of a strange, hollow relief. 7 years. 7 years of silence, of whispered lies and suffocating truths. Mingxian stood beside her, his newly sighted eyes, which once held a comforting blankness, now seemed to pierce through her, dissecting her very being. He hadn't spoken since they'd left the hospital, a chilling echo of their reversed roles from the past. He looked lost. Or perhaps, she thought with a flicker of bitterness, he was simply realizing the true weight of his freedom. Gong Mingxian and I are getting a divorce, Qingyu's voice, clear and resonant, sliced through the tense air. The clerk behind the counter startled, her eyes darting between them. It was probably the first time she'd heard Qingyu speak. Mingxian flinched, the muscles in his jaw tightening. He finally turned to her, his gaze intense. Qingyu held his gaze, a silent challenge in her eyes. Let him see her, the real her, not the phantom he'd constructed in his mind during her years of silence. The car ride back was punctuated by the rhythmic swish of the windshield wipers battling the sudden downpour. Mingxian gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. He'd imagined this moment countless times during his blindness, fantasizing about the day Qingyu's voice would return. But now, it felt like a stranger's voice, echoing in the confined space of the car, a stranger who held his past, his daughter, his everything. His blindness had been a cage, but it had also been a shield. Now, exposed to the harsh glare of reality, he felt vulnerable, raw. He glanced at Qingyu. Her face was impassive, a carefully constructed mask. He longed to see the woman behind the mask, the woman who had cared for him, the woman he had loved. Did he love her? The question hung heavy in the air, thick and suffocating like the humid air before the storm. Weiwei sat in the back, small and silent, a miniature replica of her mother's stoicism. She watched them both, her large, expressive eyes reflecting the turbulent emotions swirling around them. She had always sensed the unspoken tension between her parents, the invisible wall that separated them. Now, that wall had crumbled, and she was caught in the crossfire. The flashing neon lights of the KTV assaulted Mingxuan's sensitive eyes. He squinted, trying to adjust to the sudden shift from the dimness of the car. The throbbing bass of the music reverberated through his chest, a stark contrast to the oppressive silence he'd grown accustomed to. He followed Qingyu inside, the scent of stale alcohol and cheap perfume clinging to the air. Why had she brought him here? He felt a knot of apprehension tighten in his stomach. A hush fell over the crowded room as Qingyu stepped onto the small stage. The spotlight illuminated her, transforming her from the quiet, unassuming woman he knew into something more. She held the microphone, her posture straight, her eyes fixed on a point beyond the crowd. He saw a flicker of something in her eyes, not fear, not nervousness, but a quiet determination. Then, she began to sing. Her voice, the same voice that had just declared their divorce, now filled the room, weaving a spellbinding melody. It was a song he'd heard countless times on the radio, the signature song of the enigmatic masked song queen. He'd often wondered about the woman behind the mask, the woman whose voice held such raw emotion, such haunting beauty. And now, here she was, standing before him, her voice washing over him like a tidal wave. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. You are the queen of the song," he whispered, the words barely audible above the music. Qingyu finished the song, holding the last note with a breathtaking control. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the ragged gasps of the stunned audience. Then, the applause erupted, a thunderous wave of appreciation. Qingyu turned to him, a small, almost triumphant smile playing on her lips. "I am the real masked song queen," she said, her voice clear and strong. A flashback slammed into Mingxuan's memory. Su Mengchen, his former colleague, a music producer, had confided in him about the masked song queen, about her unique voice, her mysterious identity. He had even played him a demo tape, a raw recording of a song that was strikingly similar to the one Qingyu had just sung. He looked at Qingyu, his mind racing. He remembered Su Mengchen's words, his admiration for the singer's talent. He remembered the hushed whispers about the masked song queen, the rumors about her personal life, her dedication to her craft. And he remembered the nights he'd spent listening to her songs, finding solace in her voice during his darkest hours. He had been living with the masked song queen all along, oblivious to her true identity. Shen Jinyu's arrival shattered the fragile truce. She stormed into the KTV, her face contorted with rage. "What is the meaning of this?" she shrieked, her voice shrill and grating. "Qingyu, you deceitful," her words were cut short as Mingxian stepped forward, his eyes blazing. "Enough," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "This is between Qingyu and me." The confrontation that followed was swift and brutal. The truth, long buried under layers of lies and misunderstandings, finally erupted. Shen Jinyu's manipulations, her jealousy, her desperate attempts to keep Mingxian and Qingyu apart, it all came pouring out. Wei Wei watched, her small body trembling, the innocent joy of her mother's revelation replaced by the harsh reality of their fractured family. Later, amidst the wreckage of their past, Mingxian and Qingyu sat in the deserted KTV, the silence broken only by the faint hum of the karaoke machine. The storm outside had subsided, leaving a fresh, clean scent in the air. "Tu didn't know," Mingxian said, his voice thick with emotion. He finally understood. He understood Qingyu's silence, her sacrifices, her hidden pain. He understood the depth of her love, a love that had endured years of hardship, years of unspoken truths. Qingyu looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and understanding. "It doesn't matter anymore," she said softly. "What matters is now." And in that moment, amidst the ruins of their past, they found a flicker of hope, a chance to rebuild, to rediscover the love that had been lost but not forgotten. The sterile scent of antiseptic hung heavy in the air, clinging to the crisp white sheets and the hushed whispers that drifted through the hospital corridors. Dawn painted the windowpanes a soft, ethereal gray, mirroring the lingering fog in Gong Mingxuan's mind. He sat by the bedside, his gaze fixed on Shen Qinyu's sleeping form. The harsh fluorescent lights above seemed to accentuate the delicate curve of her cheek, the dark smudges beneath her eyes, testaments to the weight she had carried for so long. Last night it had been a whirlwind of revelations, each more shocking than the last. Qingyu, his mute wife of 7 years, possessed a voice that had captivated thousands as the masked song. He replayed the melody in his mind, its haunting beauty now intertwined with the complex tapestry of their shared history. He'd accused her, doubted her, yet she had only loved him. A wave of self-reproach washed over him, the bitterness clinging to his throat. He reached out, his fingers hovering just above her hand. He hesitated, unsure if he had the right to touch her, to offer comfort after the pain he had inflicted. Qingyu stirred, her eyelids fluttering open. For a moment, disorientation clouded her eyes, and then recognition dawned. "Mingxian," she whispered, her voice still raspy from disuse, but to him, it was the most beautiful sound in the world. Hearing her speak his name, truly speak it after so long, a tremor ran through him. His heart ached with a mixture of relief and guilt. "You should rest," he murmured, his voice rough. He saw a flicker of hurt in her eyes, a fleeting shadow that mirrored his own inner turmoil. Don't push me away again," she pleaded, her hand reaching out to grasp his. Her touch, fragile yet firm, sent a jolt of electricity through him. He tightened his grip, his thumb gently stroking the back of her hand. "I won't," he said, the words thick with emotion. "Qingyu. He struggled to articulate the storm of emotions raging within him. How could he explain the confusion, the hurt, the overwhelming love that threatened to consume him? "I understand," she whispered, her gaze searching his face. "I understand why you were angry, why you felt betrayed." He opened his mouth to protest, but she stopped him with a gentle shake of her head. 7 years, Mingxian. 7 years I pretended to be someone I wasn't. I built walls around myself, not just for you, but for me too. I was afraid. Fear. He recognized it, the same fear that had gripped him when he lost his sight, the fear of vulnerability, of dependence. He had retreated into himself, building his own walls, brick by agonizing brick. And she, in her silence, had mirrored his isolation. A choked sob escaped his lips. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry for everything." A soft knock interrupted the fragile peace that had settled between them. Wei Wei peeked into the room, her eyes wide with concern. "Mama, are you okay?" She rushed to Qingyu's side, her small hand clutching her mother's arm. Qingyu managed a weak smile. "I'm all right, Wei Wei. This life, it's still here." Her gaze shifted to Mingxian, a silent message passing between them. A life together, a life they had almost lost. Later that morning, after Wei Wei had been taken home by Gong Mingxuan's mother, the tension in the room shifted again. Qingyu's confession had left a raw vulnerability hanging in the air. Mingxian finally voiced the question that had been plaguing him. "Su Mengchen, what is your connection to him?" Qingyu's expression hardened. "He was my manager," she said, her voice flat. "He helped me create the masked song persona. He wanted more." The implication hung heavy in the air. Mingxuan's jaw tightened. He knew, instinctively, that there was more to the story, but he also knew that pushing her now would only drive her further away. "We need to start over, Qingyu," he said, his voice low and earnest. "We need to rebuild trust, brick by brick." He took her hand in his gaze unwavering. "We don't want a divorce. We start over. We tell each other everything. No more secrets, no more lies." A tear slipped down Qingyu's cheek, but this time, it wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of relief, of hope. "Yes," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, let's start over." She leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder. The simple act of physical closeness felt like a bridge spanning the chasm that had separated them for so long. "I love you, Mingxian," she murmured, the words barely audible.